Hey, Azren, you're in Canada. Tell us a little bit about Canada. How many languages are spoken in Canada?
So Canada has two official languages, English and French. Now, what's interesting though is that one common misconception is that in Canada everybody speaks both languages, which is not at all the case. So in Canada, I would say, I don't know the exact percentage, but the majority really only speak English, and there's like one specific province we have where they really speak French. Now, some people do learn it as a second language, maybe through school. Like I did that, so I did my schooling in French. But
Was that because
but
you
yeah,
had to do it in French, or you voluntarily, your parents wanted you to do
my,
this?
my mom put me in a French school. I was 5 years old. I had no say in the matter.
Oh, your mother's a very smart woman. But,
Yeah,
okay, so there's two languages, and how many languages can you speak?
I speak five.
Okay, wow. How many? What languages can you speak?
So I speak English, obviously. I speak Gujarati with my family. It's a language from India. I'm not perfect in Gujarati. I'm like actually probably an intermediate level because I grew up in Canada and I only speak in my family. So I'm actually studying it right now. And then I speak Mandarin at an intermediate level, still learning that as well. But then I speak French and Spanish very, very fluently. So English, French, Spanish fluently, Mandarin, Gujarati intermediate.
Wow. Okay, so you can speak three languages fluently. So you're two ahead of me. Well, English is my native and Croatian is my second language, which I like to say I speak fluently. But how do you cope with three languages, fluent languages in your head, and two uh, other languages which you're at a high level?
What do you mean by how do I cope?
Well, how do you sort this information in your head? I know a lot of my learners get really confused with, okay, and how to not translate, how to organize this information. Five languages is really a lot to have in your head. How do you
Yeah.
go about keeping this? And then, okay, today I'm going to be speaking French. Tomorrow I have to speak Spanish. How do you organize your thoughts to be able to speak in those languages?
I've never thought about that before, actually. I've never thought about five languages being a lot to have in one brain.
Mhm.
But like now that I'm just thinking about it now, I think I think it definitely is. It used to be harder for me, like French and Spanish especially. Like I remember I like in high school, for example, I used to go from my like French class and go to a Spanish class, and it'd be the most confusing thing in the world. Like I'd be like, oh my God, how do I switch to Spanish now? Like it was so hard. And even in university, it'd be like it was not as hard, but it's still like a real mind twist. And to this day, it's still a little bit challenging, but I think I've just gotten used to it, just switching languages. And I think for me, one thing that helps is I feel like I have a different, I don't know if the persona is the right word, but I feel like I have, like when I'm speaking in Mandarin, my brain becomes very compartmentalized into Mandarin, and I'm very focused only on Mandarin. So even if you spoke to me in English when I was speaking in Mandarin, it'd be like, oh, I'm distracted. No, I'm focused on Mandarin right now. So like when I'm on one language, I'm in that language. And so like right now, if you were to ask me, hey, how do you say pencil in Mandarin or like French or Spanish, I'd be like, I know it, but wait, I need like 10 seconds to like unattach my brain from English, put it back into like all language mode so I can translate. And then I translate, and then I go back to English. It's really weird.
No,
So
it's
I'm
not. I can completely
really
understand you because I do the same thing. And then I always tell my students, no translating, because translating sort of makes me frustrated. Because when someone asks me, oh, how do you say mouse in English or in Croatian? Then I have to do this whole translating thing. I'm like, it's just easier for me to put it in a sentence because then it's easier to remember it in the long term, I like to think.
yeah. Yeah, very true.
Interesting, but me and you share something very similar. That's why I wanted to speak to you today, and
Mhm.
maybe we could talk about native languages and maybe what's a native language? What
Okay.
is your native language?
So technically speaking, I consider myself to have two native languages. I consider myself to have English as a native language and Gujarati as a native language. Now, this we get into some weird territory because typically when someone says, "Oh, I speak blah 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 as a native language," your brain jumps to the conclusion of, "Oh, they speak that fluently." Now, what's funny is that I speak Gujarati as a native language because it feels, when I speak it, it feels just as natural as English. I just don't have as much experience and knowledge in it, which means that I'm not as fluent in Gujarati. Does that make sense? So it's like it comes like Gujarati, to get Gujarati out of my mouth comes easier than Spanish, easier than French. It's just as easy as English, even though I speak French, Spanish, even Mandarin better than my native language. So it's like a weird conundrum.
Ah, okay, but how did you learn this language? Why did you choose to learn this language?
Gujarati?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know. I mean, I wasn't really choosing to learn. I just spoke it growing up. Like my mom was really good because my mom grew up in Canada. She's born in Uganda, which is interesting because my roots are from India, but born in Uganda, came to Canada, grew up in Canada. When I was born, she wanted me to maintain our family's language. Because we look at, for example, my cousin or other people who are kind of roughly, even people not always in my generation, even like the next generation up often, a lot of them have lost a lot of the Gujarati. My mom wanted me to maintain as much as possible. So she would try extremely hard to make sure it's only Gujarati in the house, encourage, or actually force me really to only speak Gujarati with my family members, no English, like very, very strict about it. And that worked quite well. The breakdown comes in the fact that my mom has some gaps in her Gujarati. So that's where the breakdown comes, right?
Yeah, interesting. Because I know before we started this episode, I was talking to you a little bit about my experience with the Croatian language. So I know before, maybe some of you listening at the moment may not know, but I did grow up with Croatian being my first language. So I didn't know Croatian at all. Oh, sorry, I'm mistaken. I'm getting confused. When I started going to kindergarten, my first language, which I spoke, was Croatian. But today I would consider English to be my native language and my first language, because I can't speak Croatian fluently, but moving here, I had some gaps in knowledge. Language also evolved. So a lot of how my parents were speaking the Croatian language was somehow outdated and very old. But this is something similar to what your mother also experienced, if I'm not mistaken.
In what sense?
I'm sorry, excuse me. So your mother also had some language gaps, you were saying, or she had some...
Well, language gaps more in the sense because she grew up in Canada. She didn't grow up in India, right? And so she only spoke Gujarati with my grandpa, my grandma, like family members. And so there's only a certain amount of vocabulary you're using, and there's certain types of words you don't use. So for example, maybe like with my grandparents, they never talked about geography. I don't know, maybe she learned geography in school. So what happens is that her geography knowledge is then she learns the vocabulary for geography in English, not in Gujarati, because maybe with your parents, you never talk about geography or like science, things like that. And so maybe, she doesn't know science words, for instance. So if I come home one day from school and I'm like, Mom, I was studying in the science class, I was studying chemistry, and my teacher said that if you mix this and this, it creates an explosion, right? And now I might say a lot of this in English because I've never heard the words for explosion and science experiment. So right? I might say, school mein, blah, blah, a science experiment kairu, right? I might say science experiment instead of the real word, right? And so my mom would be like, I don't know the words either. And then she would only use the English words. And so what happens is that a lot of the way that we speak incorporates some English, and more English than maybe an Indian person would include.
Interesting. Okay. And with when you're starting to learn a language, so incorporating these two different mixes, you're setting out to say master Spanish, French, or any language. How do you decide what vocabulary to learn? For example, when I moved abroad, so for me, I did start learning in a school, but then I got a little bit bored because it was a little bit different. The vocabulary wasn't that what I was applying. And then I only tried to learn two languages fluent. Well, okay, sorry. Master a second language fluently, that being Croatian. But how do you, and for work purposes, for everyday purposes, but say you're choosing to study Chinese language, Mandarin, or how do you start goal-wise, setting goals, setting a plan?
Personally, I mean, I think this is a very personal question. A couple of things that I've seen work, I would say for the majority of people, would be learning stuff that is really important to you. That can be a good starting point, number one. So for example, maybe like I can give some personal examples. Like I have a sister. So for example, my family's born in Uganda, but my roots are Indian. That kind of thing is very important for you to be able to say. And so even though you might not learn Uganda or India for the words for that, or to learn how to say my roots are from here, my family is from here, you might not learn that on lesson 1, but I kind of want to know that. So I'll talk about that, or I want to learn about that, excuse me. So that can be one place to start. Just think of stuff that's important for you. The other way to start, another good way to start is literally just to take a language class. Just take one and to start tasting language. You might not like it. You might like it. It actually doesn't matter if you like it or not like it. What matters is that you started the language and it gave you some exposure. And then you're like, ooh, I didn't like blah, 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 blah. Now you know now it gives you some data to make a decision on what your next thing should be. Like, oh, I didn't like blah, blah, blah about the class. Wow, looks like I should probably do some self-study. I should buy a textbook and just follow it by myself or whatever. Maybe you love the class. You're like, oh, I'm going to keep taking classes, right? So taking a class can just be a good entry that helps you problem solve what other things you might want to do that work for you.
Fantastic. Okay, still 5 languages. Sorry, I do really have to ask these questions countlessly. But I know that in Canada, for example, in Australia as well, there's a lot of migrants and a lot of people, you were saying before that, so your parents wanted you to learn the language, and a lot of people in Australia who come from a migrant background do know many languages. But okay, when I say many languages, I say 2 languages, maybe 3 maximum, but 5 languages it's special. Tell us, you knowing 5 languages, 3 fluently, 2 at an intermediate to advanced level, what opportunities do people like yourself, talented people like yourself, have in the workplace today?
I think so. For myself personally, so I teach a bunch of languages as my full-time gig, mostly local, but I do some online as well. Mostly local though. And it helps because I think in a lot of ways on the teaching side, number one, there's a couple things. Number one, it helps me in the sense of I usually speak the first language of my student, which means I can explain it to them without the English grammar terms, which sometimes can be confusing. I can be like, oh, you're struggling with blah, blah, blah. It's literally the same as this in your language. And they go, oh, done. Conversation finished. 10 seconds, they get it. Or like if they don't understand, maybe exists in English or in Spanish or French, but doesn't exist in their language, I can explain like an equivalent of going, oh, you don't have this point in your language, but if you did have to say it, you would always follow the following formula in your language. And they go, oh, okay. So it speeds up how quickly they can grasp something because I can just explain it to them in their language. I think the other thing as well is that I'm very vocal about my interest in languages. I post everywhere, every single social network for the most part. And so what that leads to is opportunities that I would have never knew existed. For example, I was flown down to Toronto. Someone basically bought me out for a few days to teach them French. So we went to Niagara Falls and went to different museums and we did French lessons in the field and outside of my city. I was like, I didn't know people would want to hire me for that. And so it's interesting because I'm vocal about and I'm very out there about what I like and what I'm passionate about, it leads to things that I never even thought would ever exist.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
To finish up, maybe can you tell us a little bit about one situation where you got stuck? So maybe in miscommunication, maybe you've used the wrong word in a language, or so I'm guessing you've had these situations because I've had these quite often.
Yeah.
But have you, tell us a little bit about this experience and most importantly, how you got yourself out of this situation?
Well, let me think. There's so many. Okay, I'll tell you this story. This is the funny one. I once told my teacher, I don't know how old she was, but she was considerably older than me. I was probably 17 at the time. I was in Peru and I was studying Spanish. And I wanted to say that it's hot, as in it's hot in the room, as in oh, it's really hot outside. What I ended up saying is, you're sexy or you're hot. And the worst part is that, so she didn't speak English, she spoke Spanish and German. Those are 2 languages. And she looked at me like, what? Didn't understand them. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, she's like, okay. And she was very awkward. I didn't fully realize I said something wrong, not fully. And I was like, it's interesting. It was just weird. And then I luckily I mean I didn't catch the mistake right away, but I realized I can't remember how long after exactly. I was like, oh crap, I understand what just happened. But I don't think if I it was like over, it was like 10 years ago. But I don't, if my memory serves correctly, I don't think I did anything to diffuse the situation in the moment because it didn't click to me in the moment what was happening that led to that awkwardness.
Yeah.
But it was funny, and hindsight is funny.
Yeah, no, it's nah, it's a small. Maybe you felt awkward then, but today I'm sure it's a lovely story to tell.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching and or listening to that. Really appreciate your attention. And as per usual, feel free to find me on basically any social media network that you can think about. Just search Azren the Language Nerd or PolyglotAzren, and you will find me there. And yeah, I guess we will chat later. Bye for now.